Welcome to this exclusive interview with Masroor Barzani. He is the Prime Minister of the Kurdish Regional Government of Iraq. Thank you very much for welcoming us.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Prime Minister, I want to begin with the situation in Baghdad. We've seen weeks, months actually, of protests. We've seen a new Prime Minister being nominated, Mohammed Alawi. We've seen calls for early elections. What's your take on the situation in Baghdad?
What we see in Baghdad is actually the result of bad governance for the last 15, 16 years. And many of the protesters that are now protesting and coming to the streets are asking for reforms, for tackling corruption, for a better government, which we fully support the legitimate demands of people. But sometimes political agendas are mixed, which has made everything a little bit more complicated. In fact, the previous Prime Minister, Mr. Adel Abdel Mahdi, he tried his best, but unfortunately he did not enjoy the support that he deserved from other political factions to continue and implement his agenda. But we don't think that he was responsible for all the problems that the country has. I hope that the current or the new nominee for this post that has been tasked by the President, Mr. Alawi, will enjoy much more support from both people and also the political factions so that he can be successful.
Well, they also demand new elections, and so does Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani. Would you be in favor of such new elections to maybe have a better sense of where people want to go?
Whatever the majority of the Iraqi people want, obviously we would support. But it's not just the election, it's the entire system that we have to be very worried about. And our concerns are that there has to be an inclusive government. It has to be a representative government. So the elections must aim to that direction.
If not, could there be a collapse of the Iraqi state?
Well, I don't know. I hope not. I hope that there will be a good solution for the sake of people that have suffered so much.
Obviously, there's also a lot of talk about U.S. troop withdrawal following the killing of Iran's top general Qasem Soleimani by the U.S. a month ago. Mm-hmm. I understand that you're not in favor of this. Do you think that now that some weeks have passed, this is not something that will happen, that U.S. troops will indeed remain in Iraq, or do you think they could still leave, and are you still worried about that prospect?
Let's remember, the U.S. and the coalition troops are here based on invitation from the Iraqi government previously. And they have been very helpful in fighting all of Iraq and, of course, our Peshmergas in Kurdistan in fighting ISIS. We do believe that their presence is still very much needed because ISIS is a major threat. It is not completely defeated, it's not eradicated. It can regroup and attack as they have in many different places. We think that the decision that was made, of course, it's a non-binding decision by the parliament, but they rushed into such a decision. We hope that there will be a way to find a mechanism that both the Iraqi government and the coalition forces led by the United States can be satisfied with the presence of the U.S. troops and the rest of the coalition in this region, which we think is very much needed.
Because of Iranian strikes after the killing of Qasem Soleimani, both in Iraq but also here at the U.S. and Western military base, there is talk by the U.S. government to bring Patriot anti-missile systems. Have they asked you to do this, and would you be in favor of such a system to avoid further strikes?
They have been talking about putting a defensive system here, but obviously they are waiting to talk to the Iraqi government and get permission from the Iraqi government.
But from your end, this would be a welcome move?
Yes, of course, but again, the decision has to be made by Baghdad, but if it were up to us, we wouldn't mind.
ISIS, you mentioned the fact that they're on their way back. The U.S. Special Envoy to the coalition, which has restarted operation against ISIS after a pause, said that there were up to 18,000 operatives in Syria and Iraq. Do you agree with those numbers? Can you give us your assessment of Daesh's comeback?
It is very difficult to give you an accurate number, but we have information around the same numbers, 18,000, perhaps more. But I can tell you for sure that ISIS has more members today than they used to have in 2013, before they started to attack Syria and Iraq and created their own caliphate. So there is a great possibility for reemergence of ISIS. They can regroup very easily and recruit, because all the root causes that led to the rise of ISIS and the collaboration of people with ISIS still exist. There is no political stability, there is no economic prosperity, and there is no strong security. And these are the factors that lead to the rise of terrorism. Of course, with the absence of all of these, there is a great possibility for ISIS to come back if they're not contained and confronted strongly by the rest of the coalition forces and the regional forces.
So I mentioned the fact that the operations of the coalition had resumed after a pause. Have they fully resumed? Would you want more action from the international community? You're going to be going to the Munich Security Conference. Are you going to ask for more support from the international community, saying you're not paying enough attention?
Definitely. ISIS needs to be confronted in the strongest term. But it's difficult now, because they are not holding territories like they used to in the past. So it requires a combination of both military and intelligence cooperation. You have to identify where they are and then take actions against them. But actions are needed.
Right. Where action is needed is also between you and the central government in Baghdad, especially in the so-called disputed areas between here and Baghdad. There seems to be a security vacuum there, not enough cooperation, and this is precisely the areas, the Sunni areas, where Daesh once thrived and seems to be making a comeback.
This is one of the points that we negotiated with Baghdad, and we proposed to Baghdad that there has to be a much better cooperation between Kurdistan's Peshmerga and also the Iraqi military, especially in these territories, in these areas that are called disputed, because there is a vacuum of the presence of security in those areas because of tension that existed between us and Baghdad after 2017. So these areas need to be protected. And our proposal is that both Peshmerga and the Iraqi military forces should close the gap and come back to a system that was in place, which was called the Joint Cooperation Mechanism, to once again put that in place and have a cooperation base between Peshmerga and the Iraqi military.
I mentioned the strike here a month ago after the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Was it a good decision by the US to take him out?
That was a US decision.
Do you welcome it?
I cannot speak on behalf of the United States.
Have you received threats from Iran since the strike, or have you been in touch with them to try to avert such things?
We've tried our best to stay out of this confrontation. Iran is our neighbor, United States is our friend, and we don't want to escalate or see the escalation of this confrontational tension. We think that everybody has to play a role to de-escalate and also to try to contribute to the stability in the region, and that's what we've done.
Do you think an all-out war between the US and Iran has been averted?
I hope that there will be no war. It doesn't serve anyone, and especially it doesn't serve the people. And unfortunately, we are very worried about the escalation of this confrontation any further. So I hope that everybody will seek, let's say, a peaceful negotiation and talk to resolve problems.
Right. I want to have your reaction on comments made recently by the head of Lebanon's Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. He said that Qasem Soleimani was called by the then president of the Kurdistan region, your father Masoud Barzani, when ISIS was getting close to Erbil in 2014, and he said, that the president was very worried and was calling desperately for help, and that he's been disappointed by the reaction after his killing. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the way that he acted and the way that he talked, he discredited himself. Somebody like him, at his stature, should know better how to talk about other people. Obviously, that wasn't true, and I was a bit surprised about the responses of many Arabs, not only the Kurds, but many Arabs. Because all those who know President Barzani, they know that he was leading this war against ISIS, and he was, for most of the time, in the front lines fighting with the Peshmergas against ISIS. Actually, he was the key figure in breaking the myth of ISIS and defeating the ISIS. But obviously at the beginning, there was a very difficult situation.
And Iran came to your help.
And Iranians did help by sending some ammunition, but it was the help that they claimed was much exaggerated. Obviously, we have thanked everyone that has supported us during that difficult times. But of course, there were many other coalition forces that helped us in that time. However, we have to bear in mind that they were Peshmergas that were fighting in the front lines, and it was our Peshmergas that were losing their lives to defeat ISIS and defend not only Kurdistan, but the rest of the world from this threat.
Right. Quickly, I want to get to the situation in Syria. We've seen a recent escalation between Turkey and the Syrian government. There's the situation of the Kurds there. That's certainly a concern for you. What's your take on the situation in Syria right now?
We are worried about the situation in Syria for a number of reasons. First of all, we don't think that any escalation in military confrontation would help or will help the stability of the region as a whole. The recent, let's say, invasion of Turkey in the region has also complicated the issue further.
Was a bad decision?
I think it is not helping the let's say, long-standing peace in the region. Especially that there are some elements from the Syrian opposition forces that are involved which are not welcomed by the local populations. And we are all very worried about the escalation of this problem. We are also worried about the flow of refugees as a result of the current problems in Syria. We have additional 20,000 refugees from Syria that have crossed the border and came into Kurdistan. We already were hosting about 250,000 Kurdish refugees from Syria. So yes, and people are also worried about demographic change in the region. I recently made a trip to Ankara, and I met with President Erdogan and other officials. They assured us that they have no intention of changing the demography of the region.
Them?
Well, I hope that there won't be any demographic change, because I don't think it will serve anyone.
I want to get to the situation here. We've talked about the protests in Baghdad for good governance, against corruption. There have been a number of protests in the region and actually across the globe. Your cabinet has been there since June. How much of a priority is it for you to make sure to root out corruption and to bring about better governance, because Kurds as well as others are calling for it?
That's true. In fact, this is the slogan of my cabinet. We are tackling corruption. We have, it's in our agenda. We have announced our program, that what we need to do. One is the reform, a general reform in financial and administrative areas of the government, good governance, obviously. Tackling corruption is a priority, and we have succeeded so far to stop corruption. and we are reviewing the consequences of any wrongdoings that may have happened in the past. So I believe that we have been very successful until now, but this is a long process. We are committed to fighting corruption and to hopefully bring more transparency to the people, which they really need and deserve. We have to build the trust with the people by making their government to be at their service and to be trusted by presenting all the facts and be transparent to them. So I do believe that we have come a long way. We still have a lot more to do, but I'm very pleased with the results so far.
Prime Minister Masroor Barzani, thank you very much for welcoming us here in Salahaddin near Erbil, the capital of the Kurdish region of Iraq. Thank you very much for watching this exclusive interview here.